everyone, welcome to Bamboo Builders Community Huddle. So before we begin, we'll wait for another 2 to 3 more minutes as more people start to stream onto our various live platforms. But meanwhile, while waiting, we'll actually be showing you some videos about what Bamboo Builders is and essentially what our community huddles are all about. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. So for those of you who have actually joined us and watched the video, we hope that you enjoyed it and have a better understanding of what we do. For those of you who have just tuned in and joined us, welcome to Bamboo Builders Community Huddle. My name is Charlene and I'm your MC for today. So a little background about us. Bamboo Builders is a distinctive social enterprise that builds social entrepreneurs. We believe, so how do we go about doing this is that we work with rural and urban schools throughout Southeast Asia to build future-ready leaders to become community-grounded yet relevant throughout during the ASEAN region. So we believe that many young people want to create change but don't know where or how to begin because they are unexposed. And as such, we hope that today's huddle can provide a platform for like-minded people to help tackle poverty together. So for those of you who are joining us in the comfort of your own home during this live, thank you for taking time off this morning. So it's a pity that we are unable to host this event physically, but we hope that we'll just wait patiently for COVID to end. So this huddle and this quarter, our theme is on urban poverty. And today we are very honored to have with us 4 speakers who have experience working with people living in urban poverty to share with us their learnings and their stories and journeys. So in order of sharing, we have Mr. Jonathan, co-founder of ReadAble. Next, we have Ms. Ranga, Deputy Executive Director from Beyond Social Services. Followed by we have Ms. Sobi, Community Worker from Beyond Social Services. Last but not least, we have Mr. Gabriel, founder of Bamboo Builders. So after the sharing, we'll wrap up with a short Q&A session. So for those of you who have questions during the sharing, feel free to leave them in the comment section below on our Instagram and Facebook Live. Our speakers will be more than happy to answer the questions during the Q&A segment. So without further ado, let's invite our first speaker, Mr. Jonathan, co-founder of ReadAble, where he will be sharing more about how ReadAble has started and how he hopes that this organization will start a sharing movement beyond Singapore to the rest of the world. Jonathan, please.
Okay, hi everyone. It's a bit strange speaking to all of you, despite none of you being present in this studio. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. And today I will be sharing a little bit more about our work with ReadAble. I'm not sure whether it is correct to say that I'm a co-founder of ReadAble, or rather that I stumbled upon ReadAble. Because the story of how we started as an organization is a rather happenstance one. It was in 2014, 2013, and I was doing some food distribution work in the Jalan Kukoh estate with my former church. And we went, as part of the work, we went into many of the homes of the families, found that there were children who were described as bright, smart, and they were. But at the same time, they were failing in school. And they were failing in literacy aspects and numeracy aspects. And that gave us quite a fair bit of concern. And so we approached one of the homes, one of the mums, and we asked them, can we teach your daughter? And we'll teach your daughter in your house. And the mum very generously agreed. And so that was when we started ReadAble, in the home of a rental flat. Right? And since then, the girl was quite entrepreneurial, I would say. She got a lot of friends to join us. So, it grew to about 5, 10, and slowly but surely we were teaching in 4 to 5 one-room flats. And at one point in time, I recall that we were teaching on the staircase landing. And that was when we realized, okay, this is getting a bit out of control, right? We really need to get something more sustainable going, because teaching at the staircase landing is really not ideal. And so we started working together with the RC at the community space there, so that we can have a more conducive place for lessons to take place, right? So that was when we really started becoming a proper organization. But in any case, I think we have this vision over here, which is that every child is to be literate for life. And we have this mission as well, which you can read from the screen. Right? About last year, we also added numeracy to our what we offer. So we started, instead, not just ReadAble, we got countable. Right? And that's one of the arms of what we do. So, yeah, I think I covered this quite a bit. But just to briefly explain, we've got 4 main sectors that we kind of divided our classes to, because as we grew, we realized that we had to specialize. The first is the preschool class, followed by the primary school class, and the post-primary school class, and finally we have a class for migrant mothers, because 80% of the children we work with have a foreign mother. Right? And these mothers put in a lot of effort. They want to help their kids, and we wanted to empower them to help their children. So I think it's important that when we start something, we have a philosophy that guides us. And so the very first principle that we operate on at ReadAble is that first, we believe that every child has to be loved. And education takes place against a background of many factors. Right? For example, you would imagine that a child in a home with a lot of family violence would not be doing as well as a child in a home where both parents are loving, where the dynamics are good. Right? It is a no-brainer. But so the first thing that we have is that every child has to be loved, because children try to be loved. Right? And so that's something that we encourage all our volunteers to do, and we tell them that at the heart of what we do is about relationships with the child and their families. And the second thing that we try to do is to have every family partnered. So family support is extremely critical to a child's success. Right? If the parents, the homes are empowered to monitor their children's performance in schools, they know what to, how to raise a child, then that is going to add to the power of the work. So that's something that we do. We undertake home visits to our children's homes quite regularly. The next thing we do is that it's not enough just to have children or know the parents, but volunteers have to be taken care of. And so at ReadAble, we do take volunteer care quite seriously. And the next principle that we come to is that every volunteer has to be empowered. And over here you see a picture of one of our training sessions before COVID hit. This was a session where we tried to teach and make sure that our volunteers, they have training in the phonetics and how do you handle children, especially in days when they are not so ready to learn. And finally, we have here everyone as part of a community. At the heart of it, right, it's about relationships. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that everybody at ReadAble is part of a community in the sense that we care for a child, we care for their families, and we care for the volunteers. And I think it's with this intentional effort to care for everyone that we can build a community and we can get people to come together and to serve each other. I think it's extremely important as well that when we do the work, it's not about a beneficiary or a benefactor, but it's really a two-way street where everyone is learning from each other and growing in their own ways. So that's the philosophy behind what we do at ReadAble. And now, turning to our principles, I think this is something that we try to undertake in the execution of our lessons. So the first principle is that of early intervention. The earlier we find a child, the more we can work with them, and the more we can build good habits with them that can set the foundation for learning subsequently. The second one is because we keep to a very low volunteer to student ratio, so the space for personalized engagement is very present, and we try to use that as much as possible to customize the approach for every child. And this year, when COVID hit, that has really been a blessing because you had Zoom lessons, and every child had the benefit of some personalized attention. The third is to try to build strong partnerships with stable home environments because that is quite crucial. And the fourth is to try to partner with like-minded community organizations who have other resources to put on the table. So the first one, I think in the course of the work that we've done, we've realized that a lot of the early preschool kids, they are children who have very weak foundation sometimes, and that has really set them back quite a fair bit by the time they reach primary school, right? Because all their peers can read, they can engage with the material, but a lot of the children we serve, unfortunately, it's very difficult for them to do that. So what we do at our preschool class is that we try to build good habits and build a love for learning, and we do that with a very play-based curriculum, which is, I think, at the moment, some of these slides are a little bit outdated. At the moment, we are kind of like mixing and changing as COVID, as we have to deal with the effects of COVID and try to adapt our syllabus somewhat. And the second one, we have a class for what we call the ReadAble Rangers class, and that's when children start hitting primary school age and they start engaging with deeper material, real text, and that's where we try to use the Fitzroy curriculum as a structure for children to slowly develop their reading proficiency. For the ReadAble Champions class, these are children who have finished the Fitzroy curriculum. So what do we do with them? We engage them in discussions, and some of these discussions are extremely fun. We're going to have soon a module on climate change. We're going to, and I think we've done with them, we explored the issue of food with them before, and that culminated in a class where everybody was making popiah in class. So that was really fun. And I think if you haven't followed us yet, some of our kids have published their work on this Instagram page called Humans of Kuko, which you can check out. Some of the stories are incredibly inspiring, and they were all the work of the kids we are teaching. And finally, we have a class for migrant mothers where we teach intentionally migrant mothers the skills to have functional English, because that empowers them to survive in the community, in society. It helps them to read their children's report books better. We help them to communicate, right, at work better. We teach them what the kids are going through in school, and all these small things add up to better educational prospects for the children. And finally, I want to touch on countable. And countable is now become a very key part of our work, because numeracy skills are extremely critical. By way of background, many of the kids in the estates, they have extremely weak mathematical ability. And that's because they have never really managed to engage the tangible and the abstract. Right? When we are young, we play with saga seeds or whatever. That's for my time, right? But a lot of the children nowadays, they just go from nothing, and suddenly you are expected to understand the concept of 1, 2, and 3 at primary school. And it just doesn't happen that way. Like, kids don't just make the leap. And so at Countable, what we try to do is to build that foundation for kids with the hope that by the time they reach primary school, they will not be left behind in mathematics class. Right? And so with these two arms, right, readable and countable, we try to help the children master literacy and numeracy. And with literacy and numeracy, our hope is that they will be able to learn anything they want in their life in the future. Right. How do we do our lessons? We talked about strong partnerships with our partners. We partner very regularly with Catch Plus, and they are a very, very helpful part of our work because they work together at the RC, and as a result, we are able to have a good space for lessons every single week. We've also worked with quite a number of other community groups which provide resources, learning trips, and other things for our kids. So at the end of last year, we worked together with the KPMG Dragon Boating Club, and we brought some of our older children to go dragon boating at the Kallang River, and that was really a fun trip out for the day. I think finally, what we hope is that we don't stay in Jalan Kukoh itself. To the extent that we have learned lessons, we hope to be able to share these experiences with any group out there that want to start something. And I think because this is not exactly a national-based kind of a program, this is something that we believe if we have something to share both to someone overseas and that someone overseas wants to learn from our experiences, we are more than happy to share it. Just contact us and reach out to us. So that's about the end of what we have to share today. But as a last word of encouragement, perhaps what we can say is, for everyone out there who is hesitant, right, who think that starting their own thing is daunting, you can, I guess, learn from our story, because truth be told, when I, at least speaking to myself, when I started serving in the Jalan Kukoh, I never really expected to start ReadAble. It's not like I went in, I'm going to start ReadAble. Things did not happen like that. Right? It just grew out of control, frankly speaking. And that's where we ended up here today. So let life take you on an unexpected journey sometimes, and you'll never know where it goes. Right? So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the heartwarming stories. And one thing that really caught my attention was actually the close bonds and the relationships which the community forms back in ReadAble, which is really closely connected to one another. So next up, we actually invite Ms. Ranga, Deputy Executive Director from Beyond Social Services, where she'll be sharing more about the poverty in Singapore and how Beyond Social Services uses the community work to work with youth and children from low-income family. Ranga, please.
Thank you, Bamboo Builders, for having us today. I don't know about you, but I was really, really inspired by Jonathan sharing about ReadAble. It's actually partners like ReadAble that actually make the work that Beyond does a lot more creative and adventurous for the children that we work with. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about Beyond Social Services and how the family is the building block of community. So you may wonder, I'm here to talk about poverty and what does family or community have to do with it. You can't solve poverty by ourselves. So I don't even know whether we can solve poverty as a problem. So I'm standing here in this space, which is very, very nicely put up, and there's the developmental goals, sustainable developmental goals of the UN on the wall. And the very first SDG is actually no poverty. So we were just having a discussion before the session started. Is there such a thing as no poverty? That is a moot point, right? Many of us believe that there can be equality, there can be attempts to ensure that people do not live below a poverty line, but there will always be inequality in society as long as we manage to work in a way that people feel included, they feel valued, and they can contribute back to community. So that's where the family and community comes in. So I may have less money, but I don't feel worthless as a result of it. So if you can just capture that, right? So I may have less money, I might have other disadvantages in my life, but I do not feel worthless as a result. So you can see that Beyond actually works towards looking at the strengths of people in whichever situations that they are in and provide opportunities for them to contribute back to community. So they do not feel like they are problems to be solved, but they do feel human, which is what all of us are. So Beyond actually started as a voluntary welfare organization. In Singapore now, they've changed the VWO category or the naming to social service agencies. So now we are called SSAs. But Beyond actually believes that we cannot do our work without volunteers coming in to help us, coming in to participate in society. So they're not really helping us, but they're coming to participate in society in a way to resolve the problems that the society may face. So Beyond is a voluntary welfare organization, and we are dedicated to working with children, youth, and families in 1- and 2-room rental flats across Singapore. So we are in 64 rental blocks in various parts of mainly central Singapore, but we've just started some work in Yishun as well. And our roots are actually in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Singapore. So we are 51 years old this year. We started after the Bukit Ho Swee fires in 1969, and in 1968 actually. So our organization was formed in 1969, and last year was actually a walk down memory lane where we met up with many people who were there as pioneers, building up Beyond. At that time we were not called Beyond, we were called Bukit Ho Swee Social Service Project. So it started out as a small project, and till today we are pretty small. And our main vision is actually to create neighborhoods where every individual, including children and youth, has an active role to play and is able to cooperate with and support each other. Why this is important is because we don't live alone. We all live in our networks, within our families, within a community. And when we do that, after a while, you find that you are made up of the people around you, you're made up of your own experiences, and when someone in your community is not doing too well, you are able to lend your experiences to that person to help them to overcome whatever that they are going through. So this is a very, very important part of supporting communities that are in the same boat and looking at, in that boat, how many people have the strengths, who can lend different types of strengths. So you may have seen during COVID-19 this very famous quote, right? We are maybe in the same boat, but we're not in the same storm. Or is it the other way around? We are in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat, sorry. Yes. So all of us are going through COVID-19, and we have different ways of coping. But some people are not in these reinforced structures that allows them to sail through the storm as others are. So some of them are in very leaky boats. When something like this hits, they are very, very affected by what happens. And it's due to no fault of theirs, right? So they have been in a certain income bracket, they've been in jobs that can be easily replaced, and when COVID-19 hits, they will immediately fall through the cracks. So that is what is happening. So when we do work, first and foremost, the centermost circle, the right here, is the most important part. The families and friends are unable to support themselves. So I'll give you an example. When we work with partners like, let's say, ReadAble, or we run our own learning programs in the communities that we are in, the children come to class once a week, and the class is run by volunteers, and the volunteers fall into this society supports community. They are external volunteers who are from various institutions, they come from corporates wanting to do some good. But what is important is when the children come to class, it is not just about learning. We also engage the parents in how they can be part of their child's learning. So I want you to visualize this. When we did surveys in the neighborhood, we found that almost 70% of families that live in rental blocks, their education level was secondary or lower. Some of them had only primary school education. Going to school was not pleasurable for these parents when they were children because they were already left behind. So when their child is now going through that experience of learning and are struggling as well, the parents don't know how to help. They also feel ill-equipped to help their children. But it does not mean that they cannot contribute to their children's learning. So we encourage parents to come forward and participate in organizing various activities, and they become our main liaisons within the community, and they link up with the RC Center where we have our classes. So Beyond does not spend a lot of money on rent. Most of it is borrowed spaces within the communities we are in. So the mothers and the fathers are the ones who would go to the RC first. They would open up the place, they'll make sure that it is ready for the children for the learning program, they'll receive the volunteers, they'll do the marking of the attendance, and the program continues. And when it's done, they close up the place and then they'll just call the community worker and say, we are done for today. When we provide such opportunities for parents to participate, they do not feel that their child's learning is something that other people are taking over. They feel a part of the child's learning, and even when they go back home, they're able to follow up with the children's learning in some way. This is just one simple example. We've had other occasions where a particular parent looks overwhelmed with their life situations, and we feel, they don't have the space to actually contribute to anything. But conversations are so important. So when we begin to speak to the parent, we found that there was one mother who seemed to be very, very affected by what was happening to her in her life. So she was going through a difficult marriage, she's about to consider divorce, and a lot of the time she would be walking around the neighborhood, not looking very focused on what she was doing, so a bit spaced out. But when we got to talking to her, she shared about her children and what she wanted them to be when they grow up. And through that conversation, we found that the mother was not somebody who could not take responsibility for her role as a mother. She was taking great responsibility, but she was not showing it to the people around her. And then we asked her, we're having this outing, would you be able to help us? And then she became all excited. And she says, yes, in my past job, I used to be in administrator. I used to do a lot of the paperwork, and I can help you. So all we had to do was to print out the name list, and she came on that day, she helped us with the registration, she actually ensured that the activity that we were doing went very, very smoothly. The contrast of the mother before her volunteering and after her volunteering is very, very different. How she looked, how she behaved, how she participated is very, very different. All it needed was an invitation. And even now when we refer to our parents living in those communities as local volunteers, they say, why do you call me a volunteer? I'm just helping my neighbors. It is not that I'm volunteering, I'm not doing something big, I'm just helping out in small ways. So the innermost circle is actually how families can come together and look at how to solve how to address the issues that they're facing. And the second circle is how the local community looks out for each other. So I've given you some examples of both. And the last circle is very, very important, which is where all of you come in. So there's a group here from Bamboo Builders that's organizing this event, right? Why should they even care about poverty? The fact that they were set up also to address poverty in the region, as well as it is something that all of us should care about. Just because you may not come from that strata doesn't mean we don't care about it. So we have a lot of people. In fact, in a year, Beyond has got about 5,000 volunteers who come to us through various channels, and all of them bring different strengths. And it's not that all these volunteers come every week or every month. Some of them volunteer ad hoc, but they do very important things. For example, I will share with you situations where our youth get into trouble with the law. So the youth has broken a law and they will go through some legal processes and they could be charged and they could end up in one of the residential facilities. They could even go to prison if they are above 21. And we have a group of volunteers who come in who are all law students, or they could be from social work, and they help us to write social reports. So something like that is crucial because a person who's undergoing training in law, a person who's doing something related to, let's say, logistics management, each of them bring different kinds of skill sets, strengths, so that they can support the needs of the families as well as the local community. So this is how we build community overall, and our main purpose is actually to ensure that as we do this, many relationships are formed between these various circles. So I'll just share some examples of this. You can find in the internet as well. Do you know that our median income is in the range of almost $9,800 per month, which is a family income, and most of our families that we work with are earning less than $1,500 per month. And I would say the last one is very, very important. On average, the families we work with are earning $750 per month. And when we look at these families, there are disadvantages in terms of spending power, in terms of being able to participate in community, like even doing simple stuff like going out for dinner as a family to the coffee shop is not available to them. So when we bring in the various levels of community, opportunities open up for them. And during COVID, actually there was a lot of impact, like there was employment loss, as a result there was income loss, there was an increase in expenses because there was panic buying and people bought up everything in the supermarket and the families could not afford to buy the cheaper products that they would normally buy. And of course there was also a fear of illness. And when all this is happening, I think what brings a bit of comfort and support is things like this. So community engagement. In Henderson, we did something in August where a group of NUS students came and facilitated a community event. We took all the precautions, social distancing and all of that. And what it eventually ended up being was notes that community members wrote to each other. And now it has formed a large community mosaic in the shape of a kampong house. So this builds a community spirit. As we do further engagement within the local communities, youth like Jovelyn come back, even though they moved out of the neighborhood to volunteer, to support, and she actually said, now I like children a bit better, because previously she didn't know how to engage the children whom she felt was naughty. And through her volunteering, she has found a different hope for her future. And this is a local response. So the people that you see sitting on the chairs are the parents that I mentioned earlier. They are parents of the children who attend our programs, and the people who are standing are volunteers. And together, they coordinate different activities. And the miracle of local response, the strength of local response was especially seen during COVID, because during circuit breaker as community workers, we could not go into the community, but the local mothers and fathers and youth helped us a lot in distributing food and essentials. So this brings me to actually a summary of everything that we have spoken about so far. When a social issue occurs, it's just not a problem to be eradicated by a professional, a social worker, a psychiatrist, or whoever that we may think is cool to do that solution, but it's actually an opportunity to rally people to work towards a common goal. The common goal, when everyone agrees on it, has got more power and more opportunities for people to be involved than any goal a professional can set for the community. So this is one thing that I'd like you to take away, that if there is a social issue, participate, step forward and support. Thank you for listening this morning.
So thank you, Ranga, for the sharing. And one thing that we actually noted and we remember is that every individual has a role to play, no matter how big or how small. So if for those of you who like to volunteer, do step up and help to contribute, be it in your own way or however way you want it. So next up, we actually have Miss Sobi, community worker with Beyond Social Services, where she'll be sharing her works with youth in rental flat community. Sobi, please.
Thank you, Valuables, for having us.
Now I'll be sharing a bit more about the way that we actually carry out community work with youth in rental-flat communities, as well as some experiences and reflections that I've had during my time in Beyond Social Services. The youth that we work with often face a lot of struggles, and these are struggles that are not small. These are struggles that really inhibit the sense of ownership they may have in their lives and also ownership that they have in the communities that they live in. To illustrate this, I will be reading a piece of writing that a male youth wrote during one of our programs, Men with Pens. This male youth name is Daniel. Throughout my life, I've always been scared and insecure, but I wasn't always like that. What caused my anxiety is my dad. He always comes home drunk, and when he is drunk, he tends to be aggressive and violent. He vents his anger on my family, friends, and myself. I always tend to argue with my dad because of how I dislike his behavior. He doesn't care about anything but himself. Financial problems have always been a big issue for my family. The one who always pays for the bills has always been my mom, and my two older siblings right now who are working to support themselves and our family. My mom is always tired because she has to support a family of 7 and pay the bills at the same time. It's hard to support a family of 7 with just a small salary. My parents will always have negative thinking and grudges about my group of friends and myself. These started when I became rebellious, egoistic, and started to get into trouble with the law. I went for rioting, I fought, I missed school constantly, and I also vandalized properties. I hope that every moment I've experienced teaches me a lesson because I am sick and tired of always arguing, getting into fights. I'm tired of feeling like I am nothing and worthless. So from this, you can actually hear what are the thoughts and emotions that a young person growing up in poverty faces. You can hear how many tensions and stresses there are that they have to face. So, unfortunately, despite the fact that they also undergo stresses like this, there is an additional stressor that they face, which is the fact that they feel they are constantly being judged by important individuals around them. So individuals like teachers, social workers, police officers, and what they feel is happening is that they are being judged based on the actions that they portray. So sometimes, the way that their pain manifests is by fighting or by missing school. Or sometimes the way that they choose to present themselves are by wearing piercings or by dyeing their hair or by choosing to change up their uniforms and things like that. So they feel labeled by them and judged by them. There's an over-focus on what is wrong about them instead of what is strong about them. So that's why I feel that us as community workers have to be very self-aware about the way that we choose to perceive the community we work in. Without intentional reflection, it can be very easy to resort to simplistic stereotypes and perceptions and assumptions about a community we live in. And to me, what is most useful is to actually view the community that you work in as real human beings who are individuals, right? Human individuals who have flaws, who have strengths, who have emotions and lived experiences, human beings who have the ability to be hurt and also hurt others at the same time. And what I strive to do is really to work together with them to recognize the different strengths and skills that each of us have and work together towards a common goal. So one of the ways that we actually strive to do this is by creating spaces to reframe and reclaim narratives of themselves and also of their community at the same time. Now one may ask, why is it even important to think about narratives in the first place? To me, I think it's important because ultimately narratives guide the way that you lead your life and the way that you view the situation that you're in. It guides the perception that you have of yourself. And a lot of the times, if you don't do intentional reflection about it, it can be easy to believe what other people say about you. So for a lot of the youths, they tend to have this inherent feeling that they are failures in life, that they are ultimately criminals who will never do anything good. To me, and ultimately, a lot of the times also, marginalized community stories are always being told by other people who may not necessarily understand their situation fully. So taking charge of your own personal story actually can help you feel like you have autonomy over your own lives. One way that we do this is actually through our youth program, like Men with Friends, for example. So the pictures that you see over here are from the program Men with Friends. And through this program, what we do is work together with male youths to discuss together, reflect together about themselves, and ultimately, they work towards performing it at the substation. And over the past few months, we have been working together with them to put out a performance at the substation. And we met once a week to have group discussions about their experiences, emotions, and write personal stories and practice performing. And during this time, we also really strive to validate and affirm the stories that the boys had of themselves. It was during this time of working together that I had the opportunity to hear Daniel's story, whom I shared just now, and his friends, and hear how they actually internalized all of the negative stereotypes that they had heard from other people. And when sharing their problems, they felt like they were innately bad people who were at fault for every single problem, because that was all they ever heard. It was also during this program that I also witnessed a small transformation, a really beautiful transformation, where I saw how they went from individuals who would tell me like, oh no Sobi, I don't really want to talk about my feelings because I want to bottle it all up, don't want to understand me, things like that. They went from individuals who had thoughts like that to individuals who chose to put in the work to rewrite their stories, chose to put in the work to commit to one another, and showcase them with strength and pride. And we were all immensely proud of them. And I will always feel really happy that they chose to trust in us and the space that we created. So what are some of the ways that we actually choose to create spaces? From our experience, we actually noticed that sometimes conventional forms of discussion are not necessarily the most productive or the most accessible. They may not be accessible in also eliciting stories and also excavating the deep emotions that exist within us. For a lot of us, it can be very hard to externalize our thoughts or even organize them with words in simple conversation. It's a really big mess sometimes in our brains, and navigating it alone can be daunting. That's why we try to use interesting mediums like applied drama, writing, photography, and more. And I really find that they serve as great tools to make understanding of emotions, issues, and expressions of thought more accessible. And the pictures that you see over here is actually from our different community theatre programs. Community theatre is a key feature in our work because of the things that I've shared before this. Basically, what we do during these sessions is to use applied drama specifically to discuss issues and eventually act together. And we have discussed about things like poverty, addiction, mental health, community pride, incarceration, and many more. And actually, I noticed how being in this group and talking about these difficult issues as a group can make you feel less alone and make the addressing of issues less scary. It makes you feel powerful because you can address it together with other people. Now, it may seem odd talking about these things with youths because they are really serious things, but I see power in this because they have a direct stake in these issues, right? So as I said earlier, usually discussions about these issues are being done by people like policymakers or helping professionals without directly consulting the individuals who are living these stories themselves. But the voices of those who face and live these issues are really important when choosing to inform how we choose to address solutions in the same time. And to me, I believe that they need a seat at a decision-making table about their lives. And this brings me to my next point actually, about how youth voices can and should be amplified in community spaces in the wider public. We have seen how, if given the opportunity, youths can be active contributors, youths can be leaders, and youth can be advocates even for the issues that they face, if you choose to create spaces for it. For example, the Youth in Community Theatre, a program run by my colleague Izati, actually have performed and held spaces for conversations and community discussions in their own neighborhood blocks, so at the void decks and things like that. And they have talked about things like incarceration and poverty. And from those multiple sessions in neighborhood blocks, they also went on to perform at the Esplanade to a really huge audience 4 times in a row, and they spoke about poverty from their own stories. And I think that's something that's really important to believe that is possible for the youth that we work with as well. In some of our other programs also, we see how youths actually step up to organize and facilitate events and activities for their fellow community members. These are all strengths and skills that should be celebrated because of how it highlights firmly that anyone should feel like an agent of change in their lives and not helpless, especially not youths. So another key component in the work that we do, community building, is definitely widening the circle and linking up with different groups and individuals in the community. One of the most important groups that we work with is definitely the parents and caring adults that we work with. So I remember that the very first time I tried to talk to youths about sexual harassment, it was in actually a mother's house, a mother who lived in that community. This mother and her house were seen as safe havens by the youths at that time. So we asked her if it would be possible to have her to host us, as we had been facing a lot of difficulties engaging them before that. From that one session in the house, where we spoke about sexual harassment, eventually we went on to more and more conversations and sessions, and eventually now we have 2 youth groups called Men with Friends and Girls Night. And so the point that it shows is that actually people in the communities are very key to our relationship building with different groups as well. Other ways that this manifests is also when parents cook food for our programs, or when they attend performances, and when they also attend our rehearsals to give encouragement and moral support. Another group that we really appreciate and enjoy collaborating with are also social service agencies and artists as well, who really push the work forward. The artists who volunteer with us, like playwrights, like musicians and rappers, bring their skills, talents, and connections to the spaces that we have and actively affirm and work together with the young people in our communities as well. They take on roles as mentors, as friends, as brothers and sisters, and they really open doors of possibilities for the youth. Our relationships with helping agencies like family service centers as well have been very meaningful. Whether it's through being generous enough to provide spaces for programs for free, as there aren't many active spaces, or whether it's through co-creating programs, doing outreach, and facilitating sessions, having such relationships always make community work seem easy without any hurdle. With such relationships, the coordination of different agencies in an area and support given becomes much clearer and smoother as well. So this brings me to my next point, which is about what you can do actually. I hope that by through all the sharings that you've been hearing from Beyond Social Services, ReadAble, and Member Builders as well, it can really help you in reimagining the way that you choose to work with communities. It doesn't necessarily always have to be like a helper and beneficiary relationship, like the other speakers have shared previously. But like they have said, it can be one where everyone has strengths and skills that can be connected together and contribute actively towards the addressing of an issue. And another thing that I believe that all of us should do and can do is to choose to think about poverty in a way that is critical and reflective. So not choosing to just view poverty as people are poor and think of a solution immediately to address them, but question actively about what is going on. So why does poverty exist in the first place? What are the structures that keep it in place? What are the ways that helping policies are structured, and what should be changed about them? What are the stereotypes that people have about people who are living in poverty? These are all questions that all of us should be actively asking before we choose to address this issue in the first place. And you can do this in many ways. So whether it's by reading books, or whether it's by actually actively going and volunteering in organizations, or speaking to different people with expertise. The main way that I actually managed to learn more about how I can contribute was when I chose to volunteer in Beyond Social Services as well, before I worked. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So thank you, Sobi, for your inspiring sharing of the individuals of the youth. So viewing communities as real human beings, viewing human beings that need to be heard, creating a safe space for them. These are some of the takeaways that I've gained and learned throughout her sharing. I hope that you have gained some experience and some takeaways as well. So we'll move on to our last and final speaker, Mr. Gabriel, founder of Bamboo Builders, where he will be sharing more about his insights from the field and what Bamboo Builders is trying to do. Gabriel, please.
Thank you, Sherman. So, yeah, welcome again, once again, to Bamboo Builders Quarterly Community Huddle. Very thankful that all of you guys are here with us, even though you're not here physically, but at least you're here with us online. So, for those of you that have never joined our community before, so I'll just give a little short introduction about myself. So, I've done quite a lot of work throughout the region in almost every Southeast Asian country. Throughout the course of the past 13 years. And actually, most of my work is regarding community development in terms of skills development and capacity building. But through the course of the years, I've also dabbled in building houses, feeding the hungry, doing medical missions, providing basic necessities such as slippers, conducting large-scale programs for children, and I think the more that I saw, the more I started to feel something that needs to be done about poverty in the region, especially urban poverty. And I think the concept of poverty is actually, I feel, is designed by the rich. It's a concept that's devised by the rich in terms of and poverty. And in other words, economic inequality is actually really about about the poor not being able to catch up with the rich. And that's especially true for urban poverty, where we live in cities and then the income per capita is higher. So over the next 10 minutes, I will try to share a bit more about poverty, and especially in the urban area, to shed a little bit more light on it through my humble experience. So first starting with KL and Malaysia, at the heart of a bustling metropolis, to the area outside Cambodia's capital, just a stone's throw away from the capital. And then lastly, talking about covering the areas of slums, which is actually present in almost every Southeast Asian country and capital or city. Yeah, so without further ado, we'll first cover Kuala Lumpur and statelessness. So this is actually a picture taken last year where we conducted an explore program by Bamboo Builders for some members of the public to a refugee learning center in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So what a learning center actually does is basically it functions as a school as well as a daycare center for children of refugees who have migrated to KL. So a lot of times these refugees come from war-torn areas. So you think about states like the Rakhine state in Myanmar, or like Pakistan, or even Afghanistan and Iraq, as far as those areas. So a lot of times the reason why they have this migration is to flee, the troubled area, and then to find and build a new life in a new country. And what more, Malaysia, which is a first world country, to build a new life in its capital, right? So, but however, upon reaching the capital, a lot of times the plans didn't really seem to work out. So they would face things like rejection of like jobs, denial from healthcare, as well as denial from basic education. So the whole reason why these things happen is because they are not considered citizens of Malaysia, or even citizens of any state sometimes, for that matter. So how are they even really going to settle down, in a new country and build a new life? So it's especially troublesome and stressful and worrying for them, especially when they have mouths to feed. So we've also went on and interacted with the indigenous people of Malaysia, otherwise known as Orang Asli. So we've actually gone on a short trek through their traditional trail where they showed us their local, the traditional plants and trees that they live off actually. So even in 2020, in this modern day and age, many of them are still surviving off these forest trails and the forest, right? So however, given like illegal logging or like just urban redevelopment projects, the size of the forest upon which they live off is getting smaller and smaller. So this actually reduces the amount of resources that they can live off, and it actually has put a lot of them into severe malnutrition, poverty, and hunger as well. So a whopping 78% of the children are actually dropping out of primary school in Malaysia. And when I heard this statistic, and I was a bit shocked and kind of feeling like how on earth are they going to get out of this situation that they are already in? 50% of them live like severely below the poverty line, and then 78% of their children are dropping out of primary school. So it just doesn't really make sense in terms of their future, right? What's going to happen to them? And as the size of the forest slowly decreases, a lot of them have to constantly move, and it's difficult for them to settle in a particular area. So this also makes it difficult for them to harvest the assets and resources by the traditional way, which is farming. Yeah, so moving on to Phnom Penh, land exploitation. So this is a picture of a hut just on the outskirts of Phnom Penh, and actually I met a man who was telling me that he actually works odd jobs. He decided to work odd jobs instead of farming, even though farming is more profitable. So I asked him why. So he was saying that like in these areas, especially just outside the capital of Phnom Penh, it's very precarious. You don't really know what will happen like the next day, because he was telling me there was this story once where like they were living in this area in their huts, going about their daily lives, and then a lot of times the area outside the capital, the land outside the capital is slated for redevelopment projects. So you could have MNC or like a huge company come in and telling the government, hey, I want this plot of land, I want to build a factory there, I want to employ people, I want to produce goods. But there are people living there, living in slums. So the government will actually work together with the police to drive these people out. And a convenient way that the police does this, they don't politely knock on your door, if there is a door, and request that you go out, or even like offer you compensation. What they do is they just burn the first hut, and then the fires just continue from there. And then soon the whole land will be cleared. And then in like a month or so, you can see a shiny new factory over there, as if nothing has happened. So, yeah, with such occurrences happening, how can you expect these people to settle down, to invest in resources, whatever little resources or time that they have in productive assets, right? That will increase their income. Yeah, so this is just an example of a picture that was taken outside of Phnom Penh. Yeah, so lastly, like the stratification. You can see in the picture over here, there's a shiny new building, probably about 200, 300 meters from where this picture was taken. So this picture is actually a picture of a railway slum within Cambodia also. So the thing about slums is that there's a lot of the houses are all built together, dilapidated houses, crammed together in a small area, and the place really, really stinks from the neighborhood rubbish center. So the rubbish dump is actually like located right next to the previous picture. And the thing about this area is that you have hundreds or thousands of people living together in closely, densely populated, small little plot of land. You will get issues like like hygiene issues, sanitation problems, and of course vices that will happen more easily. So with a lack of access to healthcare, it's just a time bomb waiting to happen, right? And then in addition to this, like a lot of times they come to the cities looking for new opportunities, looking for new jobs, but instead because they don't understand the system of the rich, they are unable to find these opportunities or these jobs and are actually sometimes exploited instead. So yes, in conclusion, for urban poverty, we see statelessness in Kuala Lumpur that a possible solution to this would be citizenship, land exploitation in Phnom Penh, which would possibly a solution to this would have political voice. And then lastly, slums, a solution can be basic amenities. And I feel most of these can be covered by the state, especially for urban poverty. But how about rural poverty? Rural poverty is something that is sometimes a very sticky situation. The more you try and pull the cart, the wheels just get deeper and deeper. And it's really hard work and dirty work. Like I think our previous speakers have mentioned, right? Sobi, Ranga, and Jonathan. But the thing is that sometimes big shiny organizations also have their wheels stuck. So it's really not about the size of organizations, but really about the longevity of the plans and the persistence and grit of the community workers. Yeah, so this is Bamboo Builders. We always try to work in small groups, small sizes, and we believe in empowering and equipping youth to create change in their community through social entrepreneurship. So we believe that everybody has, a lot of youth want to do good, want to do something about social issues, but they don't really know where or how to begin, especially in the rural communities as well. So we actually work. So in order to achieve this, these are what the rural schools look like. We actually work with rural schools to encourage students to come to school, because in rural areas, parents would rather have their children go to work than go to school. So we work together with rural schools and teachers to introduce curriculum that would build businesses. So these businesses will actually pay the students a salary when they come to school, as well as support teacher incomes, so that they don't migrate out of the village into the city, right? Because a lot of times, sometimes the teachers that stay behind in rural areas are those that never even passed the exams before, and they are the ones that teaching the students, the future students of the village. So it's just a really sorry situation. Yeah. So these are some examples of the projects that we started. So in Vietnam, we started social enterprise selling snacks to spread traffic safety awareness to the community, and it was supported by Honda, VNPT, which is their version of Singtel, the Youth Union, which is their version of NYC, as well as the local police force. So since then, it's also combined with another project to become an e-commerce fashion apparel store on Facebook. So in Myanmar as well, not sure if you can see the photo, So we started a honey cooperative that's about 6 hours away from Yangon. It's a honey cooperative, and to date we started with, so to date we sold about 100 bottles in Yangon. It looks very pretty like that. And they're currently supporting 44 students and 5 teachers. So I think something defining about these businesses is that we equip and empower them to support themselves. So these businesses are owned solely by the locals. Bamboo Builders does not have a stake in it. It doesn't own it. So I think it's really empowering when you equip them with the skills to be able to bridge this gap between, and help them to bridge this gap between the rural and the urban. So locally, closer to home also, recently we started our Explore Food Waste project, where we want to expose the issue of indulgence in a country as blessed as us. Meanwhile, there are people overseas with no food to eat. So we conduct Explore programs where we bring our participants to see firsthand the amount of food waste that happens on a daily basis, sometimes even hourly basis. And because of COVID, we actually have brought our programs online as well. So here's a picture of us conducting programs for SUSS and Ngee Ann Poly. So our hope, and then after this, they actually design social projects to deal with the social issue. So it's not just about skills learned, but about skills applied as well, and internalized through the experience. So I think with that, I just want to say that poverty is really about a problem of accessibility. So a lot of us, we living in this rich strata, I think it's our responsibility to really reach out and take actionable steps towards doing something about the issue, right? Whether it's volunteering or just spreading the word. A lot of our programs want to empower and equip youth to do something about it. So, for example, we have our Change Maker program that we started. You can look at it on our website. That actually aims to train facilitators and trainers that will eventually provide quality education to students from low-income groups through social projects. Alternatively, if you have no time, we also are open to financial support. There are 2 main areas that we are open to. The first one is sponsorship of logistics and administrative costs. These come as just a one-time donation. And then another interesting form of donation is also investment in our rural startups. So because our rural startups are especially vulnerable, stability is something that is valued. So instead of a one-time donation, we do require sustained support for at least 3 months. We are not particular about the amount that you pay. There's no minimum, but every dollar counts. Especially if it's a Singapore dollar, it goes further. Especially when there's currency changes involved. So yeah, I'll just leave this on the screen, and with that, thank you, and I hope that everybody watching this today takes actionable steps towards doing something about poverty. Thank you.
So thank you, Gabriel, for the inspiring sharing, and for the photos too, because as they always say, photos speak 1,000 words. So with that, we actually come to the end of the speaker's sharing and the stories that they share. We hope that it actually touch your heart because it has touched mine. We hope that you actually learn and gain a better understanding of what the issues surrounding urban poverty. So as the sharing has continued just now, we noted that there are some questions flowing in onto our Instagram and Facebook page, and we thank you for the questions. And with that, we actually move on to our Q&A segment, where we'll move on to our Q&A segment, where we invite the speakers back onto the stage to answer the questions. Speakers, please. So thank you, speakers, for the sharing, and I hope you actually enjoyed it. So for the first question, maybe how do you promote a sense of community and help among families in poverty? Anyone wants to take?
I think one of the main ways is by creating opportunities firstly for individuals together, right? So sometimes what we do is, I think we, together with mothers in Bureau of Social Services, we do things like food distributions, where community members can come down and volunteer together. Other times maybe we have things like, I think some youths organize something called a free fair, where community members also came down and collected things that they need or work together also to create that. And there are also other ways for them together, whether it's through performances where they can discuss together. So I think the first key thing for community members to feel like a community is by having spaces where they can gather and connect and relate to one another. And I think another thing to also note is that you don't necessarily also always have to feel like you need to create it. You also should acknowledge that they themselves already have naturally organic relationships that are existing between them, right? So noticing that I remember that there was this man who chose to help buy food for kids who were along his stretch of units because he knew that they weren't having enough food for themselves, right? Or I hear so many stories about neighbors lending money even when they have little money to give. So I think these are also some things to note when you choose to look at community building, recognizing that there are already existing relationships and thinking about how we can push that further or how we also can bring ourselves inside there that complement the relationships that already exist.
I can go next. So I think about developing communities, something that we do is to understand first the local context. So I think that applies in Singapore as well. So like what Sobi was mentioning about existing relationships. Yeah, but I think, so other than understanding, like what we seek to understand is the local ways of doing things, because sometimes that may be more efficient than if we were to come in from an outsider's perspective and try and implement what we think are better and more efficient solutions. Yeah, because some of the things that we are familiar with just doesn't exist in that area. So it's a whole new world. Yeah. So other than understanding about the local way of doing things, I think something else that's also important is partnerships. Yeah. So partnerships with local organizations, and not just organizations but individuals as well. So like community leaders, and as well as people of influence and basically people that are like-minded in the direction that we want to go and to help the community as a whole. Yeah.
I think there is a fundamental assumption behind the question that needs to be unpacked, which is this. The assumption is that people want that community. What if they don't? What if you come to me and say that this community building event that's going on, and say like, I don't want to go. And what are you going to say to them? So behind the question, I think when you do this kind of ask this kind of questions, the pre-question is, have we listened? And if we haven't listened, and if that's not what they want, then why are we going on this?
I think Jonathan has touched on a very, very important point. So it is not coming from the outside to impose something. That's very, very important. And also to recognize that community is not like a straight line that keeps going up. There's times where we get together with people because we like being there, we want to participate in something, and at times it just crashes. So knowing that it's an organic development of relationships, passion, there are different types of communities. There's communities of place. Just because I live next to you doesn't mean I'm your friend, right? So there's communities of place, there's communities of passion. There's so many different types of communities that occur, and it's always recognizing what these are. And our role, I think, if you want to participate in a community, is to be humble and to first learn, listen, learn. And when you are in there, to also try and expand the space, because often in the very disadvantaged communities, people feel they don't have enough mental, emotional, physical space. So I think our role to always keep expanding more space for people to participate. So while we speak of community in the abstract, I think how community comes about is also through crisis. So when something hits, right, then people who are affected by the problem immediately, and the people around them who see that I can do something to contribute to support someone and alleviate their hurt, I think that is a way in which people bond and come together. And when that happens, actually, if you are coming from the outside as a volunteer, you actually cannot experience the hurt the community is experiencing. So first and foremost, you must be able to be present, let people come together and suggest their own solutions.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question, which is, do you think the current measures to combat and alleviate poverty are enough? How can we as individuals and communities help to address this issue?
I really wonder whether we see our efforts and policies as alleviating poverty. While we have spoken about poverty alleviation programs before, often when we talk about social support, it seems to be that we are looking at short-term measures to support people so that eventually even a short space of time, they should all be well and happy and be able to continue on their own. So as a country, we believe that people must be strong enough, must step forward, you must believe in your own personal strength, and just overcome. So, we're very good at just gritting our teeth and carrying on, right? But if too many things are stacked against you, actually it's very hard for an individual to become that strong and overcome. And if it's a moving target you're talking about, like previously maybe owning a house in the 60s, you would have paid a couple of $1,000s to get a HDB flat, but now it's a couple of $100,000 to get a HDB flat, all in a space of actually 35 years. So knowing that target has moved so far ahead, and there are people left behind because they will never make those few $100,000 to be able to own a flat, then we have to see how can we address the basic needs. So if you look at housing, food, employment, with employment comes a minimum salary, livable wage. There are many, many areas in which we need to look at it. And I think right now what we're looking at is basically providing some support to overcome the immediate challenges, not even to overcome, maybe to make it a little bit better. So I'm not sure whether we have a grand big plan on alleviating poverty. So I wonder, and for that to happen, more awareness needs to be raised. So you and I, who are listening to this conversation, participating in it, in our own little network, we really have to ask ourselves, what does that look like? What does a society that has more equality look like? How can people overcome the disadvantages that they are experiencing And while they work hard, maybe working hard is not going to get them there, what else needs to change? So there's a lot of important questions to ask, I think, before we explore whether what we have is sufficient.
I think that this is a multi-dimensional question. Because a lot of people frame the issue of poverty as one that is primarily financial. And I really question that notion. Is it financial or is it social? And if it's social, then we just need to do an experiment on ourselves, okay? So ask yourselves this question. How many friends from a low-income family do you actually have? And by friends, I mean people that you will go and hang out with and eat with, and just because they are friends, right? Because friends, I suppose for me at least, the idea of friendship is that it's unconditional, right? I'm not there to get something out of that person. And I think sometimes the tendency, right, for a lot of people when you look at the issue of poverty is to look at it from the lens of a benefactor and a beneficiary. You are a problem to be solved because you are poor. And I think when we have that kind of a mindset, then forget about empowering individuals, to forget about the programs, because programs don't change people. Relationships change people, right? And I think that this is the subject of a New York Times article, to be honest. So when we ask that question, I don't know if the intent is to say maybe government needs to give more or something like government can't build relationships, right? Nobody walks into a government agency and says, I love the government. Maybe I've said that, right? Ask, if we are asking that question, then is the question like, what can I do? Am I prepared to put up a cost? Is it going to cost me? Or am I just going to say, oh, it's someone else's problem, it's the government's problem? Because if that is where we're headed, then this question is moot. But if we are prepared to say that, okay, I'm prepared to build a relationship, this is somebody that I am going to care for somebody, right, one family, and I'm going to invest my time and energy into that one family, then okay, I think we can begin to have a discussion about it.
I think if current efforts are being enough, then our organizations wouldn't be here, or we wouldn't have these conversations. Yeah, I think especially for like overseas, because most of my experience is overseas. Yeah, like what was mentioned earlier in the slides also, we have like government like corruption, and even sometimes like non-profits overseas, there tends to be some level of corruption, or even if it's not considered, even if it's not illegal corruption, it's like not all the donations actually, not most of the donations actually go to the intended beneficiaries, especially when it's like not as highly regulated in that country. Yeah, so I think that's where the potential of business comes into play, especially social business, to plug in the gaps where there are. And I'm not saying that currently what the government doing or like NGOs what they're doing is like useless. But I think it's a huge bathtub with many holes, and so everybody's just trying to plug in that gap. So I think the more players there are, the more people that are contributing to this, plugging in one gap at a time, eventually we will slowly make our way there.
Thanks, guys. I think another question that some of our viewers are quite interested is, what are some of the challenges that you faced while, whether you started working in your various organizations or just interacting with the youth in general?
I think one of the struggles that I face, I think it's also quite related to something that Jonathan mentioned earlier, which is whether the community that I'm working in or the people that I'm trying to reach out even want to be part of whatever it is that we're trying to do in the first place. Right, so I remember one time me and my colleagues were trying to address sexual harassment that some girls in the community had raised to us. And during that time I had felt that, I chose to focus on just a few adult voices who didn't really seem to care about those problems, and chose to frame the community as, they don't really care about this issue, so should I really be working on it in the first place? Right, but then I spoke to someone and then she reminded me how, okay, the adults don't want to speak about it, but the girls do. That's why the girls came to you in the first place, right? They came to you because they care about this. So it wouldn't be fair of you to just focus on one group and use that group to understand the entire community in the first place, right? Community ultimately is made up of different groups in a space. They're not just a big mess of individuals. They are actual individuals with different interests, with different lived experiences, different pressing issues at that point of time. So I think that reframing was something that I needed to focus on also. And when I started viewing the fact that there are different groups and all ultimately have different aims, I think that helped me strategize a bit more also about, when there is a pressing issue in the first place that takes place, what are the ways that we can try to appeal to different groups at the same time, right? Because it's not like that issue isn't important, but it could be that everyone has different pressing concerns at that point of time or different prevailing narratives about the issue that could be ultimately harmful for that one small group also that are the most vulnerable in a particular community. Another struggle I faced also was, the whole buy-in as well. And I remember that I was finding it really difficult to engage boys in a community especially, right? Because I guess, I'm a woman and naturally they don't feel like they immediately relate or connect to me, right? So I also felt like giving up at one time. But then what I relied on was I spoke to this musician called Subhash Nahar at a conference, and I told him that, we're actually doing work with boys, but it's been really difficult. And then from that one conversation, he came on and started volunteering with us, and the work with the boys became alive, right? So they started, usually they wouldn't even deem it necessary to listen to me to pick up a rubbish bottle from the floor. But then when he came in and he said, the exact same situation happened, they picked up the bottle from the floor to throw it into the rubbish bin. Right, so sometimes I could have chosen to see it as I am just a bad community worker and I'm not doing good at this. But I think the way that I wanted to look at it was I have my own skill set and strengths, and I tend to do well in larger group of youths or maybe with girls, for example. But for this specific group of boys, they needed someone who was like a male role model, right? Someone that they could look up to, someone who they didn't usually have in their lives. And that's why someone like Subhash or Yani, who also volunteered together with us, was useful in nurturing that relationship together with the boys. And ultimately, now I bet if I tell them to pick up a bottle from the floor, they also would do it, right? Because our relationship naturally built throughout that time, because they also saw that it was useful for themselves and also for the community around them. Yeah.
I think for myself, people relations are the thing that I probably pay the most attention to, and if things go south, it's probably the hardest thing to repair. What someone once told me, you can have the same job, same piece of work. I change the people I work with, and it can be the difference between heaven and hell. And I think that is quite true of the space that we work in. If you get, frankly speaking, after 7 years, you begin to see that some of the parents are extremely concerned about their children's future. And they put their money where their mouth is. They spend time, they follow up on homework and do everything to give their child a better life, even if it means 65 hours a day, or it means they're extremely tired, or it means that they spend less on themselves. And you can see the result of that in the children's educational progress. Contrast that with some other families, which may not show the same level of commitment. And sometimes it gets quite frustrating because you'll be spending a lot of time trying to move or try to encourage the parents and encourage the child, but you are really fighting an uphill battle because they just don't have the same level of buy-in. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, there's very much nothing you can do.
I think all the sharing has made me reflect on some challenges. So I've been doing this for a while now. And I think one of the first things that my boss told me when I came into work at Beyond Social Services is that, people often say that you need to walk in the shoes of the people that you work with. And then he said, you can't walk in someone else's shoes if you don't take off your own shoes. Which till today I remember that so well, because I think we all go into whatever we are doing with our own life experiences, our own challenges, and sometimes we are like very proud of things that we've overcome, and we think that because we've done it, somebody else can do it. And that doesn't then allow us to listen closely. So I found that that I always carry with me. So if somebody comes in and I'm engaging anyone in conversation and they're telling me something, in my head, I'm actually saying to myself, take off your shoes, take off your shoes. Because then that opens my listening, my ears become wider in being able to listen, right? And the second thing that I always go by, I think, is what Mother Teresa said about if you begin to judge, you can't help, or something to that effect. So nothing shocks me anymore, honestly, right? Because actually, when something shocks you, it's because you begin to think, why like that? Why are people like that, right? You begin to question. Yes, there must be some anger. I think every one of us need to carry some anger with us at what is not working. But after a while, you just say, okay, this has happened, it shocks me. But you move away from the shock and say, this is what it is here now. And how am I going to then approach this person? Because that's why I try not to look at it as issues. Because when it comes to issues, we are like, it becomes a collective. You have to look at people, you have to look at individuals, a child, a mother, a father, a youth. And I think that's what helps us to overcome. And the other thing that I have shared with some colleagues is, we can't be afraid of the people we work with. So, we have volunteers who come in and then they say, is it safe for me to walk in this community at night? And I say, yeah, it's safe. Firearms are not legal in Singapore. And you won't be knifed because you're walking somewhere. We do not have environments like that. So it is to overcome some of these fears, right? And volunteers actually then come back and say, no, thank you, that was a good experience. Yes, it's not an environment I've been in before, but it was a good experience. So when it comes to challenge, there's so many, right? Like what Jonathan pointed out. Some people that you would like them to change in a certain way or behave in a certain way won't. And that doesn't make them any the worst. But then the biggest challenge then is, how do we disrupt certain negative patterns? Right? Because if we are trying to work towards inequality, and if the whole community actually doesn't value going to school, it is not something I say, okay, the community doesn't want to go to school, I just leave it, right? It can't be, because you've got to disrupt that behavior so that the children have an opportunity to participate in school and make something for themselves. So when it comes to that, sometimes it may feel like you're working against what community is looking at, and that's when you need to find champions. And believe me, in any community we've gone to, there will be some people who will see things the way that they themselves will tell you, actually, I agree with you. They become the champions, right? So it's about, maybe I haven't actually specifically said what challenges are, but I feel that these are the ways I approach challenges generally.
Just to add on just one story, I remember this, our very early years at ReadAble, we are all volunteers then, right? So one of the families, we had called them up on Saturday, and in those days we learned our classes on Sunday. We called them on Saturday, we'll be coming down tomorrow on Sunday afternoon, right? So yeah, we'll be home on that. So we turned up on Sunday afternoon, and they all went out. So sometimes you need to just be very firm, right? And I remember scolding the parents. Look, you don't waste our time here, okay? I could do other things in my Sunday if you are not free, right? But when you say you're at home, we make time to come down, you better make sure you're at home, you understand? And yeah, from then on, we never had an issue anymore.
I just wanted to add on to that as well. I think that something important to note is that while you are working in communities and you notice that there are negative patterns, it is important to disrupt them. And also at the same time, I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are reasons why certain patterns are emerging in the first place, right? So it cannot just be like an accidental thing that there are certain negative trends that exist in low-income communities, right? And it cannot always be an individual fault. There are specific stereotypes that exist, or specific policies that could be shaped better that could actually aid them. So I feel like there needs to be like a two-way street. So while we also try to enter communities and try to provide opportunities for different ways of being, or different ways of thinking about their lives, or different ways of connecting together, I think that there also needs to be an output where the very real struggles that they face, the very real unnecessary tensions that or problems they have to face also when they want to get help and things like that. I feel like those stories need to be getting out and ultimately shaping how the wider society also views poverty, for example, and also how even how policies are framed. So I think that that's important for anyone who chooses to look at poverty.
I think for those of you all that have attended our equip workshops, one of the main things that we emphasize is basically, or anybody in like relationships for that matter, right? People are complicated. And I think the reason why people are complicated is that everybody has different experiences, and these experiences shape our mindsets. And eventually these mindsets will influence how we behave in certain situations. So sometimes, and especially because mindsets have been built through years of experience, it's very, very, very hard to change. And I think it's also these kind of mindsets that leads to the patterns that we are bringing, that we are observing. So, and I think it doesn't just happen with like, this particular group of people, like this strata, but it happens in like all of us as well. So like in Bamboo Builders work, like in Singapore, like our beneficiaries are like young adults, right, young people. So a lot of times, like the kind of mindset that we have living in this system built by the rich tends to be skewed a certain way. So like for example, when we're talking about like say like volunteering, like a lot of times living in a fast-paced world, of course we have a lot of many things competing for our attention. Why should I volunteer? Why should I do something about this group of people, right? So like a lot of times knowing is very different from actually doing. In order to take that tangible step forward to do something about it, there needs to be that mindset change. So like experience that it's really hard to change people's mindsets, and yeah, so from just knowing to doing. Yeah, so that's my first point. Then I think another point is, for our overseas part is about structural, so systemic issues that we cannot do anything about. Yeah, so for example, why we chose, so in like say education in a rural area, right? Like I think, what we actually do, right, just to say again, like we actually build businesses in the rural areas, where the students are encouraged to come to school and they get paid a salary, but through learning about academic subjects through business. So for example, they learn about plus minus times divide through like accounting, yeah, or like rate through, about like production rate through like math, like rates and percentages, that kind of thing. So yeah, so one of the participants should actually ask a very good question, which is, what if because of this financial incentive, the monetary incentive, that they spend more time working on the business side of things, and then they end up spending less time studying, and then as a result they don't do well in their exams. Yeah, so that was a very good question, and it made me doubt the whole Bamboo Builders vision and mission. But after thinking about it, I realized that, like some structural things, the reason why we have this as I wouldn't say a solution, as a suggested approach to do something about it, is precisely because of structural issues. So in this area particularly, 90% of the students fail their university matriculation exam. So those that fail, they just try again next year. But a problem with this is that the teachers themselves have never passed the subject that they're teaching. Because the teachers who did well, they eventually want to move out and to move on into like the city with more comfort and a better paying job. Right? So what happens to those left behind? There's no safety net created by the government. There's no government. So that's why we hope, we want to create these businesses to support their livelihoods and at least provide some form of safety net so that they can help themselves.
Thank you for answering the questions. There are more questions coming in, but we will just answer 2 more questions because we're running out of time. So the next question would be, can you tell me or share with us more about how being not just a social or community worker, but also a drama practitioner, affects your interaction with the community? I believe this is directed to beyond social services.
I think being a drama practitioner, like me and my other colleagues who also are in beyond social services, I think the way that we look at using drama is basically that it's a very powerful tool that can be used to work in communities, right? So I think that it also opens up possibilities in our mind about how we can choose to have conversations like I shared during our sharing earlier. So let's say we notice that addiction is an issue in the community, and not because it's us who notice it, but because mothers come to us to tell us that, oh, they're worried about youth being addicted. And then social service agencies also come to us because they tell us that they're worried about youth being addicted. How we choose to approach it has many possibilities. So one way is looking at like a small-scale youth program, for example, where we just engage youths who have either been addicted or youths who have family members who are also addicted, or just youths in the community who have witnessed, right, which is something that we also do in a program called Youth Stories. And another way of looking at it is also having like a wide-scale performance, for example. So sometimes what we do in our communities are called, we do forum theatre, right? So how forum theatre works is that a group of individuals, preferably the community that is facing, undergoing that issue, puts on a performance. And while putting on that performance, or even before they put on the performance, they have to put in work to try to analyze the issue and look at the roots of it and why certain individuals do certain things. And once they have done that, they will present it to the community, the neighborhood that they're in. So in this case, in our communities, we can often expect 80 to 100 people watching any given performance, right? And after watching the performance, there's usually like a facilitated portion, right? So basically what can happen is that audience members can come on stage and change the situations that are existing. So let's say the issue that is being presented is a youth being spoken to by a drug dealer in the neighborhood, right? Or a situation is a youth living in a household where his parents are shouting at him and abusing him and a neighbor can hear, right? So these are like certain situations where you can notice that there are different individuals in that space. They can choose to make different decisions. They can choose to have turning points, right? As long as you choose to explore it together, either on stage or even in the well-being in the audience also. So I think that, and we have noticed that people actually do change certain mindsets that they have, or people have said that they feel like in some way it's like a rehearsal for reality, right? When they go on stage and they practice doing certain things that they might feel scared to do in their own homes, for example. And another layer to that is also once we choose to present a particular topic in front of the entire community, others also get aware. So maybe one particular issue is not of any importance to every single community member in a place, but if they notice that their fellow families or their fellow neighbors are facing it and facing a lot of pain because of it, they may feel inclined to also choose to step out and help, even when they didn't think to do so before. So I think like being an applied drama practitioner in the neighborhood really like opens up different avenues when we think. So like, you know, Ranga said like when you look at an issue, you don't necessarily have to feel, okay, I might be changing the meaning of it a bit, but you don't have to feel like too scared and daunted by it, but you can look at it as possibilities for people to come together. So for us, it's possibilities for people to use drama together, possibilities for people to connect together. Yeah.
Thank you. For the last question, maybe now that they've actually shared from the sharing to the answering the Q&A, right? So what is that one issue or one thing you'd like us to know about the issue? It can be as simple as like one sentence to wrap up everything. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, poverty, whether it's urban or rural, is about the lack of access.
Wow, this is a lot of pressure on one sentence. Could I maybe pass it on to Jonathan?
People don't care how much you know until they know that you care.
I think it was my last slide that I shared. A social issue is an opportunity for everyone to participate.
I think something that I've been trying to do for myself, and I hope that others can do, is that question always and reflect always about, and in this case about poverty. So whatever assumptions that you may have or like beliefs that you choose to immediately stick to because it's comfortable, try your best to challenge yourself to think outside of that, and also to think, like, don't be afraid to think radically about it at the same time.
Thank you, speakers, for the Q&A session, and thank you for the questions. So for those of you who still have more questions, do leave them in the comment section below and or in the form that we'll be sending over. So sadly, we have come to the end of our community huddle, and we hope that you have actually learned or gained something more about the issues relating to urban poverty. So once again, we'd like to thank all the speakers for taking the time to join us, and thank you, the audience, for this morning. We'd like to invite Gabriel to give a token of appreciation to the speakers. First, we have Mr. Jonathan, co-founder of ReadAble.
Next, we have Ms. Sobi, community worker with Beyond Social Services. Followed by Ms. Ranga, Deputy Executive Director of Beyond Social Services. Last but not least, we have Gabriel, founder of Bamboo Builders. So with that, we have come to the end of the community huddle. Do leave us some of your feedback, as your feedback will be greatly appreciated, and it will spur us to continue and motivate us with the works that we are doing. So head over to our Instagram or Telegram channel for the URL for the feedback form. So last but not least, we'd like to thank a few people. So first, we'd like to thank Social Collider for the venue sponsor. Next, we'd like to thank our partners for our unwavering support throughout since the movement has started. Followed by our family and friends who have supported us the whole journey, and for the friends who have actually lent us your technical tech devices to allow this live streaming possible. We'd like to thank Chelsea, Miko, and the team for organizing and executing this whole event, to run it very smoothly and to make it a success. Last but not least is you, the audience sitting behind the cameras in the comfort of your own home. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope that you actually learned something. So our community huddle starting next year will be held biannually, with the next one in March. Do follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more information and for more updates. Once again, my name is Shermin, and it's a pleasure to be your MC. Grow fast, grow strong. Thank you, and have a great weekend.